How have
I
you been
forgot.
anyway, mate?
Yeah, not bad. Cheers, mate. Yeah, I'm all right in thinking
Good.
it's your birthday yesterday or something.
It was my birthday yesterday. Yeah,
Happy
yeah.
birthday.
Thank you very much. Yeah, another year around the earth, which is
Yeah.
not too bad. Yeah.
How do birthdays look these days?
Um, I don't know really. I mean, it feels kind of embarrassing to be sort of in your forties and celebrating your birthday. Do you know what I mean? It seems like when you were younger, when you were a kid, but you kind of think, oh well, when I get to that age, I'm kind of over all that. But I'm not. I went to a gig last night, um, and I didn't get home till 1 a.m., which is a massive rarity for me these days.
Yeah, yeah.
So I've been absolutely knackered all day.
Who do you get to see?
I went to see Saul Adamchevsky,
Oh,
who
okay.
used to be in Fat White Family,
Ah,
and
yeah.
he's got his own band, Insecure Men. He was playing. He'd put a night on called A Night in Heaven, which was at a venue. I say venue. It's like a converted MOT garage in Bermondsey on an industrial estate.
Right.
Um, and it was sort of,
Very London, yeah.
it's, yeah, it was like a semi-improvised sort of drone folk noise kind of collection of artists.
Okay.
So yeah, that was my birthday. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. Is Fat White Family someone you'd recommend? I've never really got tried to get into them.
Yeah. Um, I mean, I first saw him. When would that have been? I mean, been a while ago, probably about 2012 or 2013. Um, and I'd seen an interview with them on The Quietus, and I was like, "Oh, these sound ace, so I'll check them out." And so I went out and bought the first record, and it's great because it sounds like a cross between um, sort of the makeup, country teasers, bong water, stuff like that.
Right.
Um, and it's great. It's ace. And then the second record came out, which is quite possibly the darkest, sort of dirtiest record I've um, I've ever listened to. It's very sort of smack and crack, kind of personified into a sound.
Okay.
Um,
Because that does follow them around a bit, doesn't it? Or are they quite open about stuff like
yeah, I mean, I think they're very open about all that kind of stuff. Um, uh, and they're sort of they're very sort of chaotic. They supported Liam Gallagher at Nebworth
that? Right.
recently, because apparently one of Liam's sons is a big fan, and he's like, "Oh, Dad, get these on because it'll be a proper laugh." Because your fans will fucking hate them, and yeah, sort of, I think the comments on Twitter and stuff after the gig, they were right. The fans did hate them, but I mean, even if they played their regular sort of set in that slot, I don't think it'd have gone down that well with a lot of sort of like the Liam Anorak crowd. But they didn't even do that. They came on and did a 20-minute drone song called Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. But before they did that, they came on and they started playing Digsy's Dinner. So,
Right.
it's like, oh, how does it get? It's like, what a life it could be
Yeah.
if you could come. And then it does that bit about the lasagna, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But so they did it, and they did it up to the point where it was lasagna, but they just went lasagna and just kept that going on and on into a drone that then went on for sort of 20 minutes. So they didn't even give it that really satisfying end to that first part of that song. But yeah, for anyone listening who's not checked them out, I'd highly recommend them.
No, we'll
Definitely.
do, yeah. Sounds
Yeah.
interesting. But yeah, cheers for coming on, mate. So you've been on before, but I wanted to get you on the radio show to pick your top 10 songs of the 2000s. I thought you might have something a bit different. It looks like a good list. So yeah,
Yeah, I
that
kind of, I sort of decided to put a bit of a loose kind of theme to this because I think there's so many good tracks that picking 10 out of the first decade of that millennium of music would be impossible. So I kind of thought because everything you do with the podcast and stuff, it's very, it's all centered on this sort of. I'm saying the word scene, but for anyone listening, I'm using sort of inverted commas because it feels kind of naff. But it's all centered around that whole sort of like scene or cultural change within maybe what you'd call alternative music. And whilst that was going on, I was starting a band with Dan and Si called Black Wire. So I kind of thought what I'd do with this is pick the 10 songs that really stuck with me and made a massive impression before I even met Dan and Si. And the interesting thing is that when we did finally meet, probably about 3 months after one of the last songs on here, we found that all of these songs at some point had been quite pivotal in sort of artistic decisions that we've made. So these songs are really important kind of to me at that time, but I think this is a bit of a taste of what was going on on everyone's turntables or radios around that time, because everything sort of changed at once in relatively small terms. I mean, we're only talking about a couple of genres of music here, but these were the songs that kind of brought at least us three kind of together without us knowing each other. So
yeah, I suppose one maybe that people won't guess is So Solid Crew to kick off then. 21 seconds.
yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of funny. So when I was a kid, sort of 13, 12, 13, 14, I was massively into like American hip hop and rap, which I kind of think most people my age at that time in sort of like 93, 94, before Britpop sort of became mainstream. I think, yeah, a lot of people sort of my age were. And so I've always had an interest in where sort of, rap or hip hop was going. And then UK garage started getting quite big, at least in mainstream terms. I mean, I certainly never followed it when it was more underground. I was living in Derby at the time, and UK garage was predominantly a very London thing. You ain't gonna get anything like that in Derby, believe me. They were still getting over fucking the Shadows and Shawaddy Waddy. So I'd kind of heard some UK garage stuff, and I felt I was I was really disappointed because I'd kind of been all the magazines I'd been reading, like The Face and Sleaze Nation magazines, which were really pivotal in terms of music stuff that was going on at the time that wasn't necessarily guitar based. They'd been talking about UK garage quite a lot, and I finally got around. I'm not sure how. Maybe listening to like probably some BBC radio show, and I can't remember what track it was. I can't remember. They were doing a night of UK garage, and I was listening to it, and I was like, you know what? I'm really let down. I don't like it. I found it a lot of the stuff really saccharine, really sweet, kind of quite poppy. I mean, it was probably because that was what they were playing on BBC radio. They're not going to chuck on some deep cuts there. So I kind of felt a bit let down, and then I heard 21 Seconds by So Solid, and it was exactly what I wanted. It's kind of exactly what I thought all UK garage was going to sound like. There's a bit of a harder edge. There's a sort of darker kind of feel to the actual beats and the production on it, which I think you can draw a direct line from what So Solid were doing to maybe 2 years later to Grime. It, it was taking things in a much darker way. Yeah, and I just think it's an absolutely brilliant song. I think it's fantastic. I think at the time, people saw it as a bit of a novelty song, because there's a thematic element going on. There's 10 or 11 rappers on there, and they've got to make a 3.5 minute song, so they all do 21 seconds of bars, right? Which,
I never
I
knew the
mean,
logic behind that, actually.
yeah. So their label had basically said, look, if you want to kind of break out of this underground UK garage scene, we need something on the radio. So you need a song that is going to be 3.5 minutes. And so they were like, well, yeah, there's like fucking 11 of us. You know what I mean? We're going to do that. So they just whipped the calculator out, divided it up, and went, right, everyone's got 21 seconds.
Right, that is interesting.
So I think people kind of saw that as a bit of a novelty. And I think because this was a lot of people's first taste of UK garage, they then kind of thought that whole genre was a bit of a novelty, where, I mean, clearly it wasn't. It was such a huge cultural impact, again, particularly in London. But then you got people like Craig David, who were quite misaligned, and sort of had the piss taken out of them quite a lot. I mean, there was, I was looking up earlier to see what month this was released, and I was looking on the Wikipedia, and I noticed something that I didn't know before. When this track was reviewed in The Guardian by a guy called Pete Doherty, he was saying, it's a great track and everything, but nobody on there takes the time to say anything profound, and it lets the song down. And I had to reread it because it just seems so strange. Why should any artist or any song or any art at all have to be profound? It can be good for being what it is. I'm sure Pete Perfides thinks Kraftwerk are amazing, but have they ever said anything profound? No, they've said nothing profound at all. And it's interesting, and the more I thought about it, and I mean, I don't know if I'm thinking too deeply into this, but it was, because you think back to 2001 and that time, a lot of music, well, there was a genre, wasn't there, that was termed urban. And from what I remember, that just encompassed music that was made by Black people, regardless of whether that was hip hop, UK garage, dance music, jungle, drum and bass. It was termed urban.
But yeah, forgot about that term.
Yeah. And so I kind of think, well, he's saying that it's saying nothing profound. So it can't have any positive qualities unless it's doing something interesting. Yet that isn't demanded from sort of Jim Morrison. Do you know what I mean? Jim Morrison's not teaching you anything. He's just wearing leather trousers and calling himself a lizard king and wanting you to believe that. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, but it's still brilliant. It's still fun. And I just kind of feel like by saying that it's not saying anything profound, it's saying it's not really worthy. But then would, Last Night by The Strokes, that doesn't say anything profound. Is it worthy? Of course it is. It's an absolutely fantastic song, just like this, And that aside, I can see why people may see it as a bit of a novelty song because of that thematic element. But it's not like it's the Birdie song. Do you know what I mean? It's not like Black Lace or something.
Yeah.
And I just think it's great. And I think it kind of ushered in something into the mainstream in the UK that was missing a little bit. Absolutely incredible pop music that had an edge to it. I think that had been missing for quite some time, and this kind of dragged it into the spotlight, particularly when they performed it on the Brit Awards, because they won a Brit Award for the best music video, which is kind of ironic, really, because the video is pretty cheesy, pretty crap. But then looking back, it was a time where special effects like that were maybe more, I don't know, maybe more sort of interesting than they look now. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I've got a vivid memory of watching the video when I was with my uncles as like a
Mm.
teenager. Definitely striking. But yeah, anyway, here's the song. Here's So Solid Crew with 21 Seconds. Um, and then yeah, McCluskey. I feel like I've heard the name, but don't really know
Yeah.
much about them.
I was listening, so I listened to so the last radio show you put out was with John Linger, is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah.
Okay, so I think he mentioned a compilation called Sonic Mook Experiment 2, Future
Mm.
Rock and Roll. And it was quite funny actually because like he was saying, he was like, you'd go back to people's houses after, a gig or a club or whatever, and everyone has sort of got the same kind of like 10 records. And anybody who was cool had this compilation, this Sonic Mook compilation. Um, and I had this compilation because I'm cool, right? um, and every track on it is absolutely incredible. But the one that really stands out to me is this McCluskey song, Lightsaber Cocksucking Blues. It's an intense white hot blast of punk rock with a bit of post rock in it. It's produced by Steve Albini, and it was a track that in Leeds at least was played pretty much every week, either at Pigs or at the Cockpit, and it'd get people going crazy. Um, and all of McCluskey's stuff is fantastic, but I kind of what's really important about them as well is that their album titles are hilarious and the song titles are fantastic. Yeah, it's just a punk rock banger, and they're great, and they're really highly revered within kind of like a lot of the post rock circles as well. Yeah.
Okay.
Had you listened to them previously?
Yeah. No, I just listened to when you sent them across.
Yeah.
And yeah, I did enjoy it. Like
Mm.
151. Kind of yeah, I said to John a similar thing, like quite a few of those bands, it's like a vibe of like playing short songs with a lot of
Yeah.
energy.
Yeah. I think that's it's something I've always been an admirer of. Anyone who can write, anyone who can say a lot within a short space of time. I think the perfect example of that would be, I think, Buzzcocks. I think they get a huge amount of information and emotion over in the shortest space of time, but everything is always wrapped up in an incredible melody as well. Not
Yeah.
that McCluskey sound like Buzzcocks, but short songs are winning songs, if you ask me. If you're
Yeah.
making a song that is, if you've got a song that's over 5 minutes long, then whatever you're saying is not really that important, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It must take courage though to like, I don't know, say like a 90-second song. Just to like be, oh, that's
Yeah,
all right, let's get out.
yeah, absolutely. But then if you think about it, like, what are the best bits? If you write a song and it's got your generic formulaic, intro, verse, chorus, bridge, outro,
Mm,
whatever. It's like, yeah, all those bits are great, but some are better than others. So why don't you just keep removing bits like kaplunk?
yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Until you're down to your absolute bare bones basic. I mean, the Vines, I think, around that time, um, sort of did that perfectly. Was there a song highly? Oh no, Get Free.
Yeah, yeah.
Again, that was. I don't even know if that was a minute long, or it must have been to get on the radio, right?
Mm.
Um, but Yeah, if you can say it in a short amount of time, say it. One track that I debated over whether putting on here or not, and it wasn't until the last minute that I didn't, and I can't remember why I didn't, was the original 7-inch version of Hotel Yorba by the White Stripes.
Hmm.
Um, because that is an incredibly short song and it's really ramshackle. And it's almost like, you know, how some songs they seem like a perfect single. You know, this is a Lightsaber Cocksucking Blues by McCluskey is a great track. It's a perfect track, but some things are perfect singles.
Hmm.
And the original Hotel Yorba by the White Stripes is one of those things. Like Dreaming of You by the Coral is also one of those perfect singles from that time as well.
Yeah, yeah. Similar to Fell in Love with a Girl. That's about 1 minute 50, I think.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then, you know, 80s Matchbox Beeline Disaster, their debut album, I think it's just over half an hour long. It might not, it might not even be half an hour long. It might be like 27 minutes or something. You know,
Yeah,
everyone was in a rush back then. The world was moving quicker because of the internet, you know. You've got people have got stuff to do. They've got
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, here's McCluskey with Lightsaber Cocksucking Blues. And then, yeah, this Yeah, yeah, yeah song, Art Star.
mm,
Was this pre-first album?
yeah. So somebody out there will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is kind of the correct timeline. They released a 12-inch EP that's known as the Master EP because the artwork on the front is sort of like a shot of Karen O from here, and then she's got a necklace on that says Master. But I think the EP is actually just called Yeah Yeah Yeahs. And there's 4 tracks on it. Um, and all of them are absolutely incredible. But Art Star to me, when I heard it, it it was exactly what I wanted. In sort of like the late 90s, I was listening to a lot of stuff like Bikini Kill, Bratmobile, Sleater Kinney, bands sort of that ilk. And they were all fantastic. And I was always kind of waiting for something like that to happen again with the newer band because all those bands had kind of happened in the early 90s when I was too young to have got into them. And by the late 90s, a lot of them had split up and it wasn't quite the time, you know, not enough time had passed before they were going to reform. So I was sort of waiting for my version of that. And then I heard the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, this Yeah Yeah Yeahs EP, and Art Star gave me exactly what I wanted. It's the title is perfect as well because it's very art school. It's kind of like you can imagine sort of someone at a New York art school forming a band and coming up with this, and that's so exciting when you're in your early 20s and you're living in Leeds. Um, and with the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, like with a lot of bands from that time, such as The Strokes and Interpol. Um, I don't know if it was the same for lots of people, but I'd seen them, not live, like just a photograph. I'd seen them before I'd heard them, and I'd already decided that I liked them. Because even though the way they looked, the way they dressed, the way the photographs were taken, where the photographs were taken, none of it was new. I mean, all of this was stuff that was heavily sort of referencing things that had gone before in the 70s and early 80s. But it was kind of new. The idea of this sort of retro futurism was new to me. You know, it wasn't probably not new at all for anybody older than me or yourself at that time. Um, but I was experiencing it for the first time, and so you know it doesn't matter what anybody else sort of thinks. So I fell in love with this band before I'd even heard them play a note. And what ties pretty much all of these songs together as well is that there's a record shop in Leeds called Jumbo, and I'd go in there every week because records were actually you know, they were affordable back then. I'd go in every week, and my friend Matt at Jumbo, he'd always put records aside, and he'd be like, "Oh, I think you like this. I think you like this. I think you like this." And a lot of stuff on here is from Matt's suggestion, and the Yeah's first EP was his suggestion. I came in and he said, "This is exactly what you're looking for." And I went, "Oh, I saw a photograph of these in, I can't remember. Again, it might be the Face magazine." I was like, "They look great." And I was like, "I don't need to listen to it. I'm just going to buy it." And he was on the money. He was right. And it's great. And it was re-released for Record Store Day. And I think the year this EP was re-released for Record Store, I think it was one of the highest selling of the releases, which kind of says a lot for a relatively small band. And as much as I love this EP, and then the first album came out, and I liked it, but felt that they'd sort of matured in a way, and there was a naivety that had kind of gone. I don't know whether that was through production. I don't know if it was through songwriting. I don't know what it was. I don't. It might not have been any of that. It might have been me. My taste might have changed. I mean, there was probably about maybe 4 or 5 months between the release of this and the album. And again, like I was saying, you know, things are moving so quick, sort of physically and metaphorically. That I'd maybe the sort of cleaner sounding debut album just didn't have that, you know, that the same power that this did. Not to say that that record's not great, because it is. It's absolutely fantastic. But for me, once I'd by the time I got the first record and I'd seen them live, I'd kind of sort of left them. You know, when their second record came out, I didn't even buy it. I kind of felt like they'd given me everything that I sort of needed, which is very, you know, very selfish. But it was the same with Interpol as well. You know, I'm fully aware that that second record is an absolute masterpiece, but Turn on the Bright Lights hit me in such a way that, for me at least, it would have been impossible for them to do anything that I would have liked as much. And it just, because it didn't have the same effect, I didn't have the patience with it, you know.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it's my fault. It's all my fault.
Click that. Yeah, anyway, here it is, Yeah's with Art Star. But yeah, I know what you mean. Like, I feel like it happened with a lot of bands where the demos captured something that the album couldn't for some reason.
Yeah. I think I do wonder about that. I thought the Modern Age EP with the Strokes, for example, the songs that are recorded on that were then re-recorded for the album, and that loses something. You know, that's not to say that that record's not great, because it's
Yeah.
you know, it's an incredible masterpiece. But
It's just a certain rawness in it where it's just like,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
the energy of it, just of it being right at the beginning that you just can't replicate.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And I think it's sort of, particularly as a kid of that age as well, sort of 20, what would have been 20 when that came out. I think your how do I put it? I think your tastes are so um that your tastes are really defined at that age, rather than refined when you get older, you know. And particularly back then, because things such as genre, I suppose, are still really important. You know, people were still considering themselves a skater or a mosher or a raver or a townie or something. Whereas now, obviously, all that is, you know,
Yeah, you don't really get that now.
I think we might have touched on this previously in the podcast, but you don't get it anymore, just because the way young people have access to music now. You know, they don't really listen to albums all the way through. They'll listen to a track that's great, and they don't give a shit if it's got guitars on it. or if it's somebody rapping, or if it's drum and bass. If they like it, they like it. I think that's absolutely fantastic because when I was their age, I missed out on so much good music because I was so obsessed with defining myself as initially a hip hop head um and then an indie kid and then a punk, you know, and you know, not necessarily refused to listen to other music, but I'd dismiss it before I'd heard a note
Mm.
because it wasn't in this predefined thing in my head. Um, which I think is quite interesting. You know, this is all accidental, but I think this sort of brings us on kind of neatly to the next song.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, the streets. Has it come to this? Um, because this really is when again it was one of those situations of reading about the streets and about Mike Skinner before I'd ever heard anything, before anything had been released even. Again, the press was mentioning UK garage quite a lot, so I was sort of expecting more of a UK garage sound, where I genuinely think the streets are almost genreless in a way. Nothing sounds like this record. I mean, it might do now, but when um, original Pirate Material came out, I defy anyone to say, "Oh, actually, you're wrong because it sounds like this." You know,
Mm.
it's this genre. It sounds like that. It really didn't. It sounded like it was held together with blue tack and masking tape, and it felt like it was going to fall apart at any minute. And it references UK garage, and it references pirate radio. It references, you know, things like Locked On and Tripoli. Um, it references jungle and drum and bass, but it's none of those things. It's not rap. I you know, I'm no expert, but I wouldn't pigeonhole Mike Skinner as a rapper, you know.
Mm.
But then I wouldn't pigeonhole him as a poet either, you know, because that's incredibly pretentious. I don't know what it is.
He's
Um,
just a maverick, isn't he? He's like
yeah,
redemption
absolutely.
maverick.
Yeah, it sounds like everything and nothing. That record, I think, and I think something really important about that is that it kind of retuned people's heads at the time because again, it wasn't rap, it wasn't indie, it wasn't punk, it wasn't pop, it wasn't UK garage, it wasn't what it said it was in any of those things. And I think the important thing about that is it starts to make people think about music in a different context. Because if it's saying it's something and it's not that, but you like it, then what's not to say that you won't like something else over here that you thought you wouldn't like because it's labeled as a certain thing. You know,
Mm.
I can totally see how um, sort of this record had a massive impact in the suburbs and towns that are on the periphery and the edge of a city because that's what it sounds like. It sounds like driving around in your mate's car on a Friday night because you're too young to get into a club and you don't want to be sat in the house with your mum and dad watching Blind Date and there's nowhere else to go, you know. It sounds like the inside of a musty old Nissan with a knackered tape deck and your mates just driving around aimlessly talking about nothing.
Yeah.
And I think so the first single, Has It Come to This, I bought the day it came out. Um, again, because of Matt from Jumbo, he put it to one side for me. But more than the actual single was the album. I remember the week before that record came out, Joe Wiley played a track every night on the evening session. And I'd only heard As It Come to This, I'd not heard anything else. That's the only single I'd got. And yeah, she played a track every night. And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that every single night I was hearing something that was just as good or even better than the night before. It was brilliant. There was tracks that sounded, you know, a bit like UK garage, but then there were tracks that sounded like the Specials and Blur, you know, like stuff like Don't Mug Yourself is pure rowdy Blur at their most belligerent, you know. And it's like this is a guy who's absorbed sort of everything around him, and the lyrics that he comes out with and the references that he makes him seem so much older than he actually is. He's wise beyond his years, you know. And again, kind of what we were saying before, the second record came out, A Grand Don't Come for Free, which, if anyone's not heard it, has got a bit of um, a narrative through the whole record, and it's great, it's fantastic, but it's not brilliant. You know, that it won loads of awards and it's highly acclaimed, and rightly so. It's good, but it's not that first record.
Mm.
The naivety had gone. I think that's what I'm finding doing this. That I like the naivety. I like the fact that people aren't afraid to do something because they feel they have to do it. You know, not because there's a record label telling them to do it. It's because they've got this creativity inside them that they need to get out, and they're not afraid of making mistakes, and they're not afraid of it not sounding perfect, and they're not being precious about what they do. They're just creating for the sake of creating, you know, and that's art, you know.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's what this is.
Well, what an introduction. This is so this is The Streets. Has it come to this? Yeah, and then the next band, I've heard them mentioned quite a few times on the podcast. Portuguese punks, am I right? The
That's
Parkinsons.
correct. Yes, the Parkinsons, Portuguese punks. Um, Again, the first time I heard the Parkinsons was on the Sonic Mook Future Rock and Roll compilation. They were on there, and I sort of dismissed them at first because one of my one thing that's always stayed with me that throughout all the sort of musical tastes and the changes in taste that have gone on through my life is that I've never really liked rock and roll. And what I mean by rock and roll, I mean that sort of like sort of 1950s kind of rock and roll. Um, you know, I'd never say I hate it. I'd never say I don't listen to it. I just don't like it. It doesn't excite me. I think because even when I was a kid growing up in the 80s, it felt like old people's music. And obviously over the years, there's been numerous bands that have come along that have tried to revive that kind of thing. And, you know, for better or worse, it's not really stuck. And I'm not talking about bands that call themselves rock and roll or define themselves as rock and roll. I'm talking about a very specific sound. And I think with the Parkinsons, I dismissed them initially because I kind of thought it sounds like fucking Eddie Cochran. And I was like, it sounds like Eddie Cochran and it sounds like the Dead Boys. And I didn't like the Dead Boys because I don't know, there's just something not going on there. And I didn't like Eddie Cochran, but I kept coming back to it. And it kind of, in my mind, it kind of elevated out of those two things. And even though I suppose on the surface it still does sound like those, if I listen to it, there's something else there. And that was galvanized when I saw them live, and they were insane. It was the most punk rock kind of thing that as a 20-year-old you would expect. And they were touring with 80s Matchbox Beeline Disaster.
Oh wow. Oh, that was
So
mad.
it was like a double header kind of thing. And that night um, was that gig was the night that I met Dan and Cy and
Oh, right, okay.
Black Wire were formed that
Yes.
very night at that very gig. Um, so yeah, the song that I picked is Primitive because that was the first one that I heard, and that's the one that I couldn't get on board with. But then by force, that song changed my mind on that band, and I bought their debut album. which I think is just called the Parkinson's. But it's fucking great. It's dirty. It's filthy. It's stupid. You know, they're almost like if they were around when I was 12 and somebody had played them to me, I'd have thought they were the greatest things in the entire world because they're just daft, you know, and they're daft and they're dangerous, but they're not dangerous as in a way as you wouldn't want to be around it. It's that fun dangerous, and that's great. That's what punk rock should be. Like, who gives a fuck about like someone like the geezer from Franz Ferdinand writing a column in The Guardian reviewing restaurants? Who wants that from a rock star? No one. It's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. I want someone in leather trousers that's got no zip or button on and no top on, rolling around on the floor in broken glass, screaming into a microphone. That's what I want. I don't want education in music. It's got no place.
Okay, well, on that note, here it is. Here's the Parkinsons with Primitive. And yeah, that links quite nicely into the next song then, 80s Matchbox. Why this particular song?
It was the first. It was the first 80s Matchbox song that I bought. In fact, I think it's the first single they released. Again, like I mentioned with some of the other bands, I saw a photograph of them before I'd even heard them, and I in fact, it was in the NME, and they done a feature on the tour with the Parkinsons. So there was photographs of both of them in there. So this is becoming a really spooky link between everything. Seeing them before I heard them, and I just thought they looked great. And the guitarist Andy, he'd got his hair was fucking incredible. It looked like witches' exhaust fumes. It was green and it was like all out here, and he'd got these super skin tight jeans on with massive turn ups, and he looked cool as fuck. And Guy McKnight, the singer, looked like somebody. He looked like the satanic Richard Ashcroft. Particularly at that time, he looked really, really like an evil Richard Ashcroft, which is great because I think Richard Ashcroft is given a lot of reverence within the idea of gods of rock and roll, when in fact I think he's a dull, boring, sub-talented sort of producer of dross. You know? So it's nice. I think it's really cool to have an evil version of him that's doing something really fucking righteous for rock and roll and for punk rock. And yeah, again, like I said, with the Parkinsons, it's the gig that Dan and Si and myself met at. So that band will always have a massive sort of like place in my heart because it was such a big signpost, you know, cultural signpost at the time. And they seemed insane. They seemed like a bunch of absolute insane lunatics. Turns out they're absolutely lovely people. But you know, it's nice to pretend that they're insane lunatics because there was no irony with it. You know, they weren't like they weren't going. You know, we're absolute nutters. You know, we're psychopaths. But you know, wink, wink. We're not really. You know, it's just ironic. We're just playing. You know, they were. That's what they saw themselves as, and it's what they wanted people to see themselves as. And irony ruined a lot of stuff within punk rock and a lot of stuff within righteous rock and roll because it stopped the mythology of things because, you know, it's like you can't say that you're the Lizard King in 2021 because people are going, oh no, he says he's the Lizard King, but actually that's really cool because what he's really referencing and what he really means is, you know, like, well, Jim Morrison thought he was a fucking lizard, right? and that's cool, and that's exciting, and and a lot of fun and a lot of joy and mystery has been taken out of all genres of music because of irony, and I think it's a shame, and I think the '90s have got a lot to answer for. You know, I think the '90s kind of ruined. Um, it kind of burst the bubble in people's heads of what could be. It's like finding out Santa isn't real. You know,
In what way?
well, because you can't lose yourself in the legacy of something anymore. Everything's constantly explained. Everything has got a footnote to it. Everything has got an index page. Um, there's no fear in rock and roll. Um, there's no fear in music. You know, I think the last time that anything sort of, I mean, you look at Alice Cooper. You know, like people were terrified of Alice Cooper. You know, it's pantomime, right? But he believed it. It was true. You know, in his mind, he was the demon that he wanted to be. And I think Marilyn Manson kind of did that a little bit. Um, but it just all falls by the wayside when everyone's got to solve everything all the time. Mysteries have to be solved. Everything has got to be
Mm,
tied up nicely in a little neat bow. And I don't like that. It's boring. I want things to keep me up at night because I don't know the answer to them. Feel like I've
yeah.
kind of gone off track a little bit now. I know what I mean, but I think that's the crux of the conversation. This particular part of the conversation, you know.
No, I know exactly what you mean. That's exactly why I love the White Stripes so much at the
Yes.
time. It's because there's so
Yeah.
much
Yeah.
mystery,
Yeah.
and
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
they were deliberately holding so much back,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
you'd end up like in forums for hours, just like, just getting anything you could about them. Whereas
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
the social media area where it's just like everything's out there, it's just like the mystery's gone.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think ultimately it takes the fun out of it as well. You know. And that's I think that's kind of been happening for the last sort of 30, 40 years. I mean, there was never anything more exciting than the thought of an event on Top of the Pops. You know, there can be an event on a live YouTube stream or Twitch or TikTok, but it's not the same because back then it was beamed into everybody's home and everyone had to sit there and fucking watch it whether they liked it or not, and it wasn't just you and your mates watching it, it was your mum and your dad and like your grandma and stuff, you know.
Yeah,
Everyone was viewing this one thing at the same time, and everyone sort of had their own opinion on it, and then you couldn't talk about it until the next day when you're at school. I sound like one of those people that are like, oh, you know what, it was all better in olden days, like, you know. And I don't believe that at all. I don't believe things were better in the olden days. I think things I was going to say things are better now, but they're not. I mean, it's all relative.
yeah,
Nothing's better than it was. Nothing's worse than it was, you know. It's just that the balance within what's good and what's bad has just shifted from one thing to the other.
yeah.
You
No, I
know.
do know what you mean. But yeah, I think we were at 80s Matchbox B, Line Disaster, so here they are with Morning is Broken. And then the next band, never heard of them before, Chicks on Speed. What can you tell us about this?
Um, so Chicks on Speed, I think so the song I've picked is called Fashion Rules. Um, and I think the most well-known song of theirs from that era is We Don't Play Guitars. Um, but the reason I picked Fashion Rules is it was just one of those songs that, again, that I would hear every week in a club in Leeds that I'd go to. Um, and it was just great. And it's another example of how genre was sort of morphing and changing at the time. You know, this I think Chicks on Speed at the time was they were known as like an electro clash band or a synthcore band. I think electro clash was kind of the term that caught on. Um, And I could quite have easily picked something like Emerge by Fisher Spooner to go on here, but I do remember that somebody picked it
Yeah, Jamie Reynolds, I think.
previously. Yeah, right. Okay. So yeah, so I decided, yeah, I'll not go with that. But I think Chicks on Speed sort of had that kind of, they weren't quite as um they were more punk rock than they were electro clash, I think. But it's hard to pick an electro clash song that I genuinely think is worthy to go on there. Um, so this one's just going to have to do. And I think it's fantastic. And Chicks on Speed, they're not just a band. I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that they were like a multimedia art collective. You know, they created paintings, they did graphic design, they wrote books, wrote manifestos, they had sort of like happenings and things like that. And it's just a fucking fun song, you know. It's a really fun song that um, it reminds me of everyone having fun at that time. It felt at that time that there weren't as many sort of shackles and constraints as there are now. You know, the constant looming sort of climate crisis, you know, the banks collapsing and everything. That was fucking 20 years into the future at that point, man. You know, we're just let your hair down and have a great time. And this is the song to have a great time to.
Okay, excellent. Well, here it is. Here's Chicks on Speed with Fashion Rules. And then the next band, I believe you supported them at one point. I remember Dan saying The Rapture.
Yeah, we did. And I fucking love this band. I this record in particular, I absolutely adore. But honest to God, I can't remember supporting them. I know we did because I've seen the ticket stubs and I've seen the posters, but I really can't. I can't remember it, and I don't know why. Because I kind of pride myself on like sort of remembering everything from being in the band because I never thought I was ever going to be in a band. So it's like everything that happened was really new and really exciting, and I had to treasure those memories because that's something that probably would never, you know, at the time I thought would never happen again.
So
So
you had that's interesting. Though. You had that awareness that you had to make the most of it.
yeah, absolutely, because I'd never had any formal musical training, um, and I just felt like I was winging it constantly, and you know, I suppose I was to start with, and and it was weird that I ever had any kind of like worry about that because all the bands that I loved all did that anyway, you know. Like the Sex Pistols, they winged it, you
Mhm.
know. All these bands sort of like made it up kind of, you know, as they went along, and that's what we did. But when it came down to it, it made me very sort of self-aware and self-conscious to a degree. So I just thought, fuck it, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it, but I need to soak it all in. I can't take any of this for granted. I'm in a very sort of privileged position to be going around the country and around the world and going into recording studios and things like that. Something I
Mm.
thought would never happen to me. So I'm not going to take it for granted. I'm going to remember everything. But I don't fucking remember that gig, man. Honestly, swear down. I do not remember it.
Fair play.
Um, but I do remember hearing this song for the first time, House of Jealous Lovers. And I think it'd be very easy to pick a lot of other Rapture songs because a lot of other Rapture songs are equally as good as this. And I think with this list of this time in particular, it could also have been quite easy to try and be cool and pick lots of deep cuts and try and sort of outfox anyone else who's been on here or who's listening who thinks they know all about it and you know drop some secret music bombs and stuff. But fuck that, I don't care. I had so much fun to this particular song. It's so abrasive sounding. The production on it is like sort of thorns and thistles and glass. It's harsh and it's wiry and it's an incredible pop song at its heart, and it's got a brilliant sort of like brilliant disco rhythm that you can really tap your foot to. But it sounds fucking nasty, you know. It sounds really petulant and it sounds teenage. And yeah, it maybe this song out of everything really perfectly encapsulates 2001 to 2003 for me. And luckily enough, this came out in 2002, so that's good because it bridges the gap. But obviously, it came out on DFA. It was produced by James Murphy, I believe. Was it produced by James Murphy, or had he buggered off at that point? I can't
No,
remember. Anyway,
there was a story. I remember Luke Jenner saying about James Murphy just going things over and over again and almost like getting into his head about it.
yeah, right, yeah, yeah. I can see that. I think you can hear that on the record as well. And I do wonder if the vocal take on this is one that was used from maybe take 250 or something, because that dude's voice is kind of shot to shit and he sounds out of breath. He sounds like he doesn't really want to do it anymore. And that's in the song is all the better for it. So if that was James Murphy's sort of modus operandi, then I kind of agree with what he did, you know, because it came out brilliantly. And I believe this was released on 12-inch and 7-inch at the same time. If you're out there and you've got the chance, get the 12-inch one, listen to the 12-inch one. It just sounds better than the 7-inch one. Sounds really tinny and flat. And I've realized I'm doing this thing that I fucking hate people doing, which is talking about records, man. Talking about I'm an audiophile. I can hear all these frequencies. You know, I wouldn't normally do that. It's just that there is a massive difference in the sound of the two. So listen to the 12-inch one. Oh, and quickly, just going back to the first track, So Solid Crew, 21 Seconds. Listen to the 12-inch version of that because it's just better. Yeah.
All right, nice one. Well, here's The Rapture with House of Jealous Lovers. Then, yeah, a bit of a side note. I realised I didn't ask you before about your bass line on Hard to Love, Easy to Lay. Obviously, quite
Yes.
iconic. Like, how does that come about?
Well, first of all, it's genuinely lovely to hear somebody say it's iconic, particularly with the conversation we've just had about me feeling like an absolute fraud being in a band because I'd never picked up a bass until that first rehearsal with Dan and Si. That came about, I was at home at my parents' in bed one Christmas, and it was Christmas Eve, and I'd been to the pub with my dad. Yes, Christmas Eve, my parents' house. I'd been to the pub with my dad. I was lying in bed, and I can't remember what I was watching on TV, but I was trying to play along to the theme tune. I really can't remember what it was, which is a shame because it might have been a bit of a key to where that baseline came from. So I was a bit pissed. Anyway, I couldn't play along to it, but I had come up with this sort of this riff that I really, really like. And I was like, I didn't have any way of recording it. I didn't have an amp with me. I only had my bass. So I just had to remember it. I didn't know what fucking notes I was playing. I didn't know if it was a D, G, E. I still don't know. I don't care. You know, I'm a punk. I don't care. So I just had to remember it. I had to remember it. So I had to keep playing, keep playing, keep playing. And like I said, I've been to the pub. I was pissed. It's Christmas Eve, but I wasn't gonna, you know, be able to go out. You know, got family stuff to do, haven't you? So I wasn't going to be able to play the bass at least the next 2 days. I had to remember it. And then I went back to Leeds, and it was the first thing that I'd ever written for Black Wire previously. The songs we'd had before, Ty had sort of shown me how to, you know, where to place my fingers on the fretboard and what to play. And this is the first time I'd ever sort of taken anything and gone, right, I've written this. Is this something? Can we do anything with this? And yeah, and those two loved it, and that then really gave me the confidence to kind of start writing my own stuff. Just that one bass line. Um, but I think it only really came to life when we were in the studio and Chok Hussain, our producer, had the smart idea of putting a tiny bit of reverb on the bass. Chok was massively into sort of came from a background of like sort of dub and things like that. And even though, obviously that record doesn't sound dub in any way, the idea of putting the reverb on the bass sort of came from that school of thought, at least. And I kind of think that's what brings it to life a little bit. But it wasn't until years later, and this is oh, you know what? I'm not going to say because we're talking about like bursting bubbles of myth and stuff. I suppose I've got to say now because I've said that. But I kind of think that we had a song called "Very Gone," and I realised that the bass line to "Hard to Love" is just "Very Gone," transposed and played in a different rhythm. It's the same fucking bass line.
I'm sure a lot of people have done a similar thing.
What I'm going to give you the option. This is like choose. There's choose your own adventure books. You've got the key now to. You can either edit that out, so the mystery and what all the stuff we were talking about remains, or you can leave it in, and it does what it does. That is up to you. You've got the power.
Yeah, I see how I feel in my day, I think. But I feel compelled to play it now, so I'll have this as my choice. You won't be picking your own song, but
okay. I did think. Believe me, I did think about it.
I mean, Jamie Reynolds did it, so
yeah.
But here's Black Wire with "Hard to Love, Easy to Learn." All right, yes. And then so the next one, the Moldy Peaches, "Who's Got the Crack." I mean, loved by a lot of people, like really.
Yeah.
One of those bands that people really treasure.
Yeah. Again, I saw a photo of him before I heard him. The recurring theme throughout the whole thing. I'd read about them I believe the first time was in the I Heart NY issue of the NME, which was a bit of a cultural touchstone for a lot of people our age around that time. And I saw a photo of them in Lee's Nation, maybe. And I just thought they looked fucking cool. I thought they looked crazy. I couldn't begin to imagine what their music sounded like. The NME titled it as anti-folk. NME didn't invent the title anti-folk. Don't get me wrong. Just that I'd never heard the term anti-folk before. Didn't know what it meant. And all I knew was that they were mates with the Strokes and they were going to be touring over here in the UK with the Strokes. And I was like, whatever they've got out, I need to go and buy it. I need to know what it sounds like. And I went into, again, Jumbo Records, and they hadn't released anything. But Matt said he was looking on a release list, and he was like, next week, they've got a single out. And then the album is out the week after. And the night before the single came out, I was listening to John Peel, and he played Who's Got the Crack. And it was the first time I'd heard him, even though I decided that I was going to buy everything this band ever released. And I was going to go to the record store 9 a.m. when it opened that day, so I could make sure I could get a copy of this record. And I'd not even heard it.
Was that just based on photographs then?
It was based on photographs. It was based on just the write-up, like, the photograph. There was two of them. You got Kimmy Dawson, who was dressed up as a giant bunny. You got Adam Green, who's dressed up like Robin Hood. And it was, again, like we're talking for fun in music. It just looked fun. It looked mad. And then I was listening to John Peel the night before this record came out, and he played Who's Got the Crack. And I was like, this is it, man. This is everything. This is everything I wanted it to be. It blew me away. It sounds like fucking shit. The guitar is played fucking arse about it. The lyrics, filthy. It's everything you want it to be. It's perfect. And the whole concept of something sounding so bad. When I say bad, I mean in terms of production, because we're talking about 2001, and we're talking about an era of sort of R&B and an era of some of the worst music ever known to humankind, like new metal. All the stuff that was around was produced in such a polished, chromatic, larger than life way, and none of that appealed to me in the slightest. But then before all of these bands, there was a couple of bands that came along. There was at the Drive-In and You All Knows by the Trail of Dead and Les Savy Fav. I think it's important to mention those because they were kind of like the precursor to all this stuff coming out. Like the Strokes may have invented this new cultural scene, but something was about to happen anyway. And it was going to be at the Drive-In that we're going to spearhead the whole thing. But what happened was at the Drive-In lost the bottle, and two of them decided they wanted to do something else, and they imploded right on the cusp of where they were going to be fucking huge. And basically, I do wonder if the Strokes would have got a look in if At the Drive-In hadn't gone by the wayside. I mean, they'd have still made great music, and they would have still had some cultural impact. But I don't think At the Drive-In's success, if it had led to what it could have been, would have allowed for another guitar band to get to that same level at the same time.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah. So again, going back to the Moldy Peaches, they really reminded me. So I'd heard Who's Got the Crack, thought it was the greatest thing, went out, bought the album, very next day, 9 a.m., and listened to it. And every single song on there I thought was great. Sounds like nursery rhymes. It sounds like sort of dirty little jokes that you'd tell in the playground. It sounds like the band The Royal Trucks. It sounds like adults refusing to be adults, and that's great. I think that's something that had been missing from music for a long time. Music had been really fucking serious for a long time. Bands like Muse had been really serious for a long time. Bands like Coldplay had been really serious for a long time. Bands like Travis, blah, 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 all the same thing. What wasn't serious was stuff like Limp Bizkit, despite the fact that they strived to be serious, but they couldn't be because everything about them was so fucking ridiculous. But they didn't allow themselves to be ridiculous, whereas the Moldy Peaches did. They embraced idiocy, and when I say idiocy, I don't mean unintelligence. I mean like an idiot savant kind of thing. They embraced getting your hands dirty. They embraced sort of like sticking your fingers up and blowing raspberries and talking about smoking crack and sort of talking about downloading porn with your friend Davo and things like that. And
Yeah.
it was great. It was a real sort of pill in the serious water of music at the time. And it was a real breath of fresh air. And they seem to me, when I think back now, even to this day, the Moldy Peaches and the Strokes are forever in my mind in the same sort of column. If somebody mentions the Strokes, I think of the Moldy Peaches. If somebody says Moldy Peaches, I think of the Strokes. They're intertwined so much. And they came over to the UK with the Strokes on the Strokes' first tour of the UK, and I got a ticket, and I was so fucking excited, right? And I was telling this story to Nick Hodgson the other week. I was queuing outside the cockpit, and I'd got there super early. I think my ticket was like number 3 or something like that that had been sold. And there was me and a couple of mates. And we got down to the cockpit really early, and we were queuing because we wanted to be the first in the queue. This was our band, you know. I was a huge Nirvana fan as a kid, but I wasn't a Nirvana fan when Nirvana were Nirvana because I was too young.
Hmm.
I didn't really give. I liked Blur. I liked Oasis. I loved Pulp. I didn't really give a fuck about Britpop. That was somebody else's thing. Again,
Yeah.
bit too young. This was ours. The Strokes and the Moldy Peaches were ours, and this tour was fucking Damascus, you know. And that night, the cockpit was a Shangri-La. And so we were the first in the queue, and I remember looking around. So I'd have been 20, I think. And I remember looking around, and I got my fucking cool leather jacket on, and I got my drainpipe jeans on that I'd probably bought about 2 weeks before, you know. And I looked around in the queue, and I said to my mate, Tom, who he's also called Tom, I said to my mate, Tom, fucking, why are all these old blokes here as well? And then, you know, thinking back, they weren't old blokes. I was 20. They were probably like 26, 27 years old. Do you know? But it felt so generation defining. And I sound quite hyperbolic about the whole thing. And obviously, this is not the case for everybody who's our age. Some people couldn't give less of a fuck about it. But to me, that's how it felt. And so the Moldy Peaches and the Strokes are forever entwined because of that tour. But here's the kicker. 2 nights before the Leeds gig, both bands played in Glasgow, I think it was. And Fab Moretti, the drummer in the Strokes, got into an argument in a chip shop
Yeah.
because someone had taken the piss out of Adam Green's Robin Hood outfit. And Fab Moretti had got angry and went outside and punched a post box, broke his hand. And so that gig at the cockpit was the gig that wasn't, you know, the Strokes couldn't play.
Well, they
So
just didn't play.
the Strokes couldn't play because
Oh,
they
right, I
didn't have
didn't
a
know
drummer.
that.
Yeah. And so everyone went home apart from about 15 or 20 people who went inside for a drink
So
on a
sorry,
moldy
what point did he find out then? Just before you went in?
just before we went in. I
That's
think
mad.
there was that big queue outside cockpit, and someone came out and went down the line telling everyone you can get a refund from wherever you bought your tickets and
Wow.
stuff. Everyone went home from about 15 people, and we went inside for a drink. So we're like, we're first in the queue. We're here. We've been here for ages. And then the Moldy Peaches came downstairs and played a full set to everyone who was there, and it was absolutely magnificent. And it didn't make up for the Strokes not playing, but it almost did in a way because it was so intimate. We got to hang out with them afterwards, and Adam Green gave me a demo CD of a band called ARE Weapons. It sounded like Suicide, which was right up my street. I was going to pick an ARE Weapons song for this list, but I'm not going to because not long ago, one of the band members came out with some pretty anti-Semitic remarks, so they can go fuck themselves. They're off my list. But it was great, and I was sat there and I was talking to the Moldy Peaches about the Strokes. I was going, "What's it like in New York? What's it like being on tour with the Strokes? What's your favorite Strokes song?" And all this kind of thing. And it's magical. Again, that band will have a massive, massive place in my heart forever. I think they sort of occupy the same place in my psyche as the Cribs as well, who I couldn't put on here because, again, if everyone remembers back to the start, it's thematic, and this is only 2001 to 2003.
Yeah, fair play, mate. So this is the Moldy Peaches with Who's Got the Crack. And then links quite well with that story into your last song, The Strokes, New York City Cops. So why this particular song?
Um, well, I mean, the Strokes have got to be in there. I'd feel disingenuous to not put them in there because they loomed so large um, with me at the time and with a lot of people. The Modern Age EP, again, Matt from Jumbo, God bless that guy. Fucking hell. He really sorted me out. He went in one day and he put it down. Oh no, actually, sorry, this is a complete lie. I guess what? I'd seen these before. Very famous photograph, well, now famous photograph of them in the NME. It's just a black and white photograph of a bunch of lads sat in a bar. But somehow, I don't know what it is, something about it makes them look more than a bunch of lads in a bar in a black and white photo having a beer. Something really, something else about it. Um, and so again, like with the Moldy Peaches, I knew that I would like this band just from seeing them. Like I was like, this is cool on a level that I didn't know existed. How does anyone be that cool? It was almost like, I don't know, it was like my own brain creating AI before AI was a thing. Like it put everything that I'd known before into a completely different context. And so I went into Jumbo and I said, have you got anything by this band, The Strokes? And again, no, it's not out yet, but come back next week. Like, right, fine. So I went back and this was before Moldy Peaches. So um, the Modern Age EP came out really, really fucking early on. I was looking it up today. It's 29th of January. Like that is the start of the year. That's really, really early in terms of when you're thinking about sort of the cultural landscape of music shifting. Um, and so I went and I got the Modern Age on 7 inch, and it blew me away. I'd liked the Velvet Underground for a long time, so it immediately struck a chord with me. There's something here that's a bit Lou Reed. There's something here that's a bit Velvet Underground. It wasn't experimental like the Velvet Underground, but it had the same sort of pop sensibilities. It sounds like um, it sounds like I forgot the geezer's name, but it'll come back to me. Who did American Girl?
Tom Petty, yeah.
Tom Petty. Sounds like Tom Petty. Last night might as well be a fucking Tom Petty song, right? But the Modern Age EP, that yeah, it blew away even the huge expectations that I had for what this band could be. But then when the album came out, it was this song, New York City Cops, that really kind of hit me the most. I don't know why. I'm not um, musically intelligent enough to be able to speak about a song and tell you it's because of this sort of tone or this tempo or anything like that. I can't explain or
I
bottle the
suppose
magic.
that riff kind of made it stand out, obviously.
Yeah, I mean it's a really fucking urgent song,
Hmm.
isn't it? That riff is incredibly urgent. And it's something that I've always liked in music. It's anti-establishment, it's anti-authoritarian. Um, it's not God Save the Queen. It's not Anarchy in the UK. It's not, you know, it's not something off of Feeding 5,000 by Kraft. But there's an anti-authoritarian um, feel to it, and for some reason, it was this song that stood out the most on that album. And interestingly, as everyone probably knows, is not on the American version of the album
Hmm.
because there was pressure from the record company to remove it after 9/11. That the album came out quite a bit later in America, I think. They had to change the artwork. Um, the famous artwork of the leather hand on the butt wasn't deemed appropriate for places like Walmart or wherever they were selling it, which is fine. You know, I mean, I think in the context of these days, would you do artwork like that? Probably not. Even back then, even at the time, I remember people saying it's a bit Spinal Tap. You know,
Yeah.
it's a bit Smell the Glove by Spinal Tap. Um, for what it's worth, I think it's a great cover. I think it's a great photograph. Um, I don't think I'd want it to represent my band. You know, I don't think I'd want it on my record cover. Um, but what they changed the artwork to in America was just fucking dreadful. Personally speaking, I think it looked awful, and it was missing New York City cops. So the country that birthed the Strokes got the bum deal on that record, and that
Mm.
sucks. That sucks for everyone involved. But I understand it. I understand that they changed. I understand why they changed the artwork, and I totally understand why they took New York City cops off. You know, post 9/11,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
because you
those
can't
lyrics,
fucking
you
yeah.
can't have it, can
Like,
you?
I mean, look, you're talking to a guy who is, ardently anti-police, right? But even I would suggest taking that off around that time.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, here it is anyway. Here's the Strokes with New York City Cops.